So welcome everyone here in Geneva and also online on the live stream. I'm really happy that that some of you are still here and motivated for our discussion on the already fourth day of Building Bridges 21. The subject of today's discussion is the sustainability transformation of Swiss retail banks. And my name is Regula Hess. I'm a senior advisor for sustainable finance at WWF Switzerland, and I'm your host for this event. So just a few words about WWF. We seek to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment and build a future in which humans live in harmony with nature. Therefore, we strive to conserve the world's biological diversity and advocate to reduce the use of natural resources to a sustainable level. Unfortunately, we are currently very far from being able to say mission accomplished. In fact, as you already heard during the week, we face the challenge of multiple crises today, the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And as you can see here on the first graph on the left, global temperatures are increasing to an unprecedented heat level with disastrous effects. And also, animals are dying at an unprecedented speed. So if some of you in the room are 50 years old, maybe there are some people here that are already 50 years old, in your lifetime, global animal population has decreased by 2/3, just your lifetime. And for WWF this, and for humanity and the planet, this is obviously concerning. And on the very right, you see that we are using much more resources that the planet can regenerate. So at WWF, we are committed to do everything we can to stop and reverse these negative trends. And we need all of you, and especially the financial sector, to support us to accomplish this goal. So today we are particularly talking about how retail banks can contribute to solving the climate and biodiversity crisis. Quickly, the agenda of the event. We are now in the introduction, and we're going to have a short presentation about the Swiss retail banking rating, a report by WWF and PwC. Then we're going to have a short survey also including the online audience and start with a panel discussion on transparency and client interaction. Then we have a short break with a second survey and another short presentation before delving into the second part of the panel on transforming mortgage and SME lending. With that, let me introduce to you my wonderful colleague, Caroline Carella. She's an advisor at Sustainable Finance in WWF Switzerland, and she played a really key role in drafting the Swiss Retail Bank Rating 2020-21 that she will now present to you.
Thank you, Regula, for the very kind introduction and for the clicker. It's really great to be here and to just share some insights on the WWF rating on the retail banking sector, and also, just greeting you all here in the room and also those that are following virtually. So being very mindful of time, it will be more of a brush through the retail bank rating. So please, if you have any questions, approach us after the session and we'd be very happy to answer them. No, sorry about that. Okay. So before really diving into the rating itself, I would like to start with the purposes. So why did we do this rating of the retail banking sector? So as Regula already mentioned, we published earlier this year the retail bank rating together with PwC. And the first one that we actually published, so this was the second one. The first one we published in 2016-2017. And both times we wanted to do was to shed light on the 15 largest Swiss retail banks and how they integrate sustainability efforts in their business, and with it really create transparency and comparability across the sector. We also wanted to showcase the economic significance of the sector and also what are the key impact areas when it comes to sustainability. There are many other goals that come with it, but really what we wanted to do was to create a foundation with which we can engage in dialogue with key stakeholders in the field. So now let's dive into the methodology itself. So I'm going to start with the visionary Bank 2030. And the reason why I'm doing that is because that's what we did when we started off with this project. So we had to define what a visionary Bank 2030 looks like, and this was our North Star for the entire assessment. So what you see here is not an exhaustive list, and it's rather, the whole point here is really to show you that a visionary bank is one that integrates sustainability aspects across many dimensions, and if not, well, all dimensions really, because the key part is that it makes it's part of its DNA, rather than doing it as a side hustle or so. So I would like to just highlight some characteristics. So this is not an exhaustive list, just I'm going to highlight a few. So a visionary bank is one that has corporate-wide strategies, and from that also deducts science-based, time-bound, and measurable targets, and that pertain to, for example, climate change and biodiversity loss. And key is also that the responsibility of achieving these targets rests at the very top with the board of directors. Then for the core business, that's a key component. So a visionary bank is one that consistently directs its financial flows from all its business, being it investments, mortgages, and so on, towards transitioning the real economy towards greater sustainability. And finally, transparency. So we're still navigating a very uncertain environment at the time, and it's ever evolving. So transparency is really the key companion in upholding credibility, and this means from all across, from the entity level all the way to the product level, to really inform and disclose the impacts, the risk and opportunities that are tied to sustainability aspects, such as, for example, climate change and biodiversity loss. So, this is so how do we operationalize this definition? You can see here. So basically, we had 5 categories. That is the visionaries, what I just shared with you, then the pioneers, the ambitious, the average, and the latecomers. And these categories have stayed the same since our first rating in 2016, 2017. The only difference is that the orientation is different, and since in 2016 we looked at the Visionary Bank 2025, and this year we looked at the Visionary Bank 2030. And this means that the expectations changed per category. So in other words, and to put it simple, we expect much more from a bank today than we did 4 years ago. And also, just to give you a bit of an idea how we did it in practice, so we considered 39 individual criteria, and we had the retail banks fill out a digital survey to answer our questions and provide supporting documents. We assessed these, and then based on our assessment, they landed in one of these 5 categories. And also one thing I'd like to point out here is that the rating of the 15 largest Swiss retail banks was against this definition that the definition of the visionary bank that we defined, and not against the average of the Swiss retail banking industry. So just to also give you an idea what exactly we looked at, so what the scope of the rating was, because I keep talking about sustainability, and I think everyone in the room knows here that sustainability has many components to it. We try to be as holistic as possible, of course, but our focus were environmental aspects, particularly pertaining to climate change and biodiversity loss aspects. And I talked about these 39 individual criteria, and they all link back to one of these 3 overarching areas. So we looked at the management, here the corporate governance, and we also looked at the core business made up of the loans and financing area, and the other area, the investment, savings, and pension provision. And each of these were weighted with a 1/3 within the rating. Now let's look at the results. So these are the results of the rating. As we see, there are no visionaries and there are no pioneers. There are 7 in the ambitious category, 6 in the average category, and 2 in the latecomer category. And what's interesting is to compare it to the 2016-2017 results, where we see that we now have more banks in the ambitious category, but still no visionaries or pioneers, as we did. The same case was also in 2016-2017. But let's maybe dive in a layer deeper and look at the 3 areas. So quick note, so the list here is not the ranking itself, it's just alphabetically ordered. But if we look at the corporate governance, we see here now that the corporate governance performed better than the core business. And when we dive into the core business and we look at the individual scores, we see that more individual banks have inadequate scores when it comes to the loans and financing area. But let's now take a dive even deeper and look at each of these three areas individually. So if we look at the corporate governance area, there we consider the social engagement and representation of interest, the governance, monitoring, reporting, and the operational management. And so there's really not time to go through everything here, but I'm just going to highlight some of the strengths that we saw in our assessment and also some of the challenges with a lot of potential to improve. So the strengths here were that we noticed that there are improvements in the target setting pertaining to sustainability challenges, as well the related monitoring and reporting thereof. However, on the flip side, when we look at specific issues, let's say climate change, we noticed that science-based emissions reduction pathways were the exception rather than the rule. And also, biodiversity aspects, in particular biodiversity-related risks, are not taken into account at the point of the rating. Looking at the area, the second area, so here we looked at savings and investment and the pension provision, both of which at industry average scored the category average. And here, again, let me just highlight one of the strengths. So we noticed that sustainability investment guidelines for investment and pension products were widespread and sometimes even covered their conventional portfolios. One of the challenges with a lot of potential was that client preferences, when they were assessed, if they were assessed in terms of sustainability preferences, it was assessed rather superficially. So there is a lot of room for potential in that. And the last area, the loans and financing. So here we had the three categories, subcategories being loans, both for private and SME clients, mortgages, and the management of environmental loan and mortgage risks. And here, one of the strengths was that we saw that of the 15 assessed banks, sustainability-related guidelines in the corporate lending were quite widespread. So the majority of the banks had this, but the scope and the stringency of these guidelines varies quite greatly. One of the challenges we saw as well was that so science-derived and time-bound targets for the financing business specifically are still the exception rather than the rule. And also we noticed that though a majority of the banks have sustainability-linked products in this area, these are still quite niche and make up a very marginal share of the entire product range. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the little appetizer of the retail bank rating, but if you want to find out more and also see what kind of recommendations we have, I really encourage you to scan the QR code or to visit our website. But I would like to leave you with just 5 key takeaways from our study. So the current analysis shows that on average there has been progress. We can see that sustainability is more strongly anchored in the strategic orientation of the banks. And we can also see that there's a growth in sustainability-linked products. Also, well, on the flip side, and there's a bit but still, we see that there's a disproportionate focus on processes and specialized products without really guiding efforts at the large, like at the impact at large and towards really measuring the impact on the real economy. And one of the examples here is really, for example, the financing business lagging behind, as we saw from the results, even though it's really that area of the business that is much more directly, it's more directly linked to the real economy, and so the potential there is really significant. Also, we saw that the transparency has improved, but really it's not matching the speed at which this area is evolving and the market is evolving. So really transparency, though it has made improvement over the years, it's still insufficient, and particularly so at product level. And we also noticed that digital solutions in this respect are really not seized as an opportunity to enhance transparency. And finally, biodiversity loss is still not treated as material to the business, even though it really is material to the business. And when we talk about climate change, it's a key component to that, but also in its own right is a topic that needs to be addressed from the corporate governance level all the way down to the core business as well. So I hope I was within time, but thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the follow-up discussion.
Thank you so much, Caroline.
Oh, sorry.
You are in time. So now we have a quick chance for interaction, both here in the room and online. So I urge, like, all the people here in the room, but also especially the ones looking at the live stream, to scan the QR code or go to the link menti.com with the right code that you can see on the slide and answer these questions. In the meantime, I would also ask our speakers to please join me on stage. Coming in, what kind of offering people are using from the retail bank. So it's mostly sustainable investment solution, the area. This is also more developed, as we've seen before. And several of you have a sustainable bank account. Interesting. Would be really interested to know which one it is. There are not so many around in the market. But we have nobody with an ecological mortgage or credit, also nobody with like a particularly sustainable credit card. Now we have a one eco mortgage or lending. Okay, so let me switch to the next question. Oh, you wanted to see the slide? Do you need the QR code again? Yes? Okay. So a question why maybe not all of us are using as many of the offerings that we would like to. So we see a lot of people with their advisor didn't make any proposals so far. Limited offering. So these are like the two main answers popping up. So let's keep that in our mind. And with that, let me introduce you to our panelists. Welcome to you. I'm really happy that you're all here today. So on the right hand, you have Yvonne Johansen. She is the co-head of the Sustainability Center of Excellence at UBS Switzerland. Welcome. Next to her, we have Martin Rohner. He is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. And then we have Amandine Fabier. She is the Head of Sustainable Finance at WWF Switzerland. And last but not least, we have Antonios Koumarakis, Sustainability and Strategic Regulatory Leader at PwC Switzerland. Welcome to all of you. And again, thanks for being here. And so the first part of our discussion will focus on transparency and client interaction. And we just saw some of how the audience interacts as a client with the bank. And therefore, Yvonne, I wanted to ask you a question just on as a reaction to the survey. So was it surprising for you what kind of offering they used and why they used it or didn't use it more? Or is also that was what you are experiencing at UBS?
Oh, it's self-service. Okay. So, well, thank you again for inviting me, and it's great to be here and have the opportunity to discuss with the colleagues here. I'm not surprised about investments being the largest offering that is being used. I think that's where most banks by now have quite a history or a tradition. Of course, also within UBS, we have had sustainable investment options from our wealth management and asset management divisions for quite some time. So that's not a surprise to me. Maybe it's a bit disappointing to see that many say that they're not being approached by their client advisors proactively on that topic. It would, of course, be great. Maybe someone in the audience can elaborate a bit on how those discussions then happen and what they then talk about, if not about sustainability in this day of age.
Thank you for this first reaction to this. Thank you for this first reaction to the survey. So now let me turn to you, Martin, on the subject of transparency. I read that transparency is one of the core values of the Global Alliance of Banking on Values. And I just wanted to know, like, how do you interpret transparency? What does it really mean to your alliance?
So the Global Alliance, for those of you that don't know us, we are a global network of about 70 banks worldwide that are, I think we consider ourselves frontrunners in sustainable and values-based finance. And I think the difference maybe to the typical sustainable banks or sustainable finance offers is that our banks start with the mission. So they're really mission-driven. They start with the values and then they approach finance from that angle. Within that, transparency plays, of course, a very important role, simply as a way to ensure accountability, ensure good governance. We look at governance, for example, whether it is transparent and very inclusive also. You have to understand that we are working with banks really both from the Global South as well as from the Global North. So sometimes there's a slightly different understanding of what diversity and transparency means. And I think we are trying to really help all of those banks to move along on the journey towards values-based banking, making sure that they are accountable and that that the information is accessible. Just some examples. We have several banks in our movement, for example, that publish every single loan they make. So from a retail banking perspective, if that is the standard, I think it's quite a high standard.
Yeah, it's interesting data to look at, I think. Maybe Antonios. In a previous conference, I heard that you did some study on transparency, especially on the SFDR in the EU. You have especially analyzed the quality of disclosure or transparency, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the findings.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you very much. I'm happy also to be here and looking forward to a great conversation. Regarding to our study, we will relaunch that also with the United Nations in a couple of weeks on a global scale. Probably to give you here some insight, we analyzed more than 220 products from a fund perspective. And we cluster these, of course, based on the disclosure regulation in the European Union, the SFDR, regarding Article 8 and Article 9, the light and dark green ones. And here we use a dedicated framework regarding to ESG patterns, where we identified on one hand also disclosure aspects. We dig also deep into the topic of investment strategies when it comes, and also ratings and data. And what we find out in this study, and this corresponds also several findings of the industry itself, that when it comes to disclosure, they are very vague, they are superficial, and a lot of things have also to be done. We are all aware that we are at the beginning of this green regulatory tsunami in the upcoming years. There are these RTS that comes up that have more of disclosure in a dedicated manner to be provided. But nevertheless, even when it comes to investment strategies itself, there is a kind of a misunderstanding. We had also seen that some kind of funds provided due to Ireland using only exclusion strategies and marked that as light green. It's a little bit questionable also because of the regulator will in the upcoming years take a look on that. We have seen also the DVS scandal, although there is a suspicion on that, and we don't know exactly the details, the risk of greenwashing is very high in the market itself. Beside of that, what is also interesting is that even there is a classification, institution by institution, evaluate that differently. We have seen when we go a little bit deeper into 2 healthcare funds in a dedicated manner, that the one fund was an Article 8 fund that provides healthcare scores in a dedicated manner and also healthcare exclusion aspects, whereas the Article 9 was the objective is this and that. And here it's more, we will see here hopefully a little bit progress in the upcoming years, and a lot of things has to be done also when it comes to data. Of course, a lot of institutions say, yeah, the data quality is insufficient. Of course, we have to start that, but here it's also, and this is wished also from the regulator in Switzerland, due to the new FINMA guidance on greenwashing, to understand this data, what is behind of that, and also to validate, to have processes in place. We are not sure that everybody is ready here, but nevertheless, the way has to be started, and we hope for the quality will be better and better in the upcoming years. Otherwise, there will be penalties. There will be a reputational risk, also what we've seen for DVS. The stock price, even when you mentioned that you are to kind of extend the front runner, can decline of around 50%, and this is a huge risk.
Anybody would like to react to something? Yeah, go for it.
Well, just very quickly, I mean, as I was listening to you, Antonio, I was just amazed at, you call it the regulatory tsunami that is coming. And I think that is exactly at the core of where we are failing in sustainable finance. Not that regulation is necessarily something wrong, but that we have to use these kind of control measures to get to sustainability in finance, instead of starting at the very top, where it's about the values and the strategic direction that you set. And I think that's where our system, also the EU, with its approach to the taxonomy, has to some degree failed, that they haven't really looked at how can they change that element. Instead of driving the values, they try to rein in and try to control everything. And I don't think that will ever lead to true sustainability. Sorry if I'm being a bit provocative here, but I'm just a little bit frustrated with the way things are currently moving.
Yeah, not to react, and it's linked. I mean, you talk about the taxonomy, and I mean, we've been discussing in our team quite a lot recently with this transparency, disclosure, combating greenwashing. I mean, it's a big topic now, and we've been looking at different, discussing, brainstorming, and to be honest, and I think a lot of people, or like people from the industry, are not going to like the answer, but we've been turning around, and we realize that it's the only way we think to really combat greenwashing is through reporting or disclosure, which is first more easy, and which is on the real impact. And you need to get at one point to kind of a taxonomy or a kind of industry classification, because there's a lot of discussion now to do the disclosure on either what I call process-based, so how the fund is being done, right? And this, honestly, I don't think is going to help much a client if you tell them, 80% of your fund is, being done as a best-in-class approach. I don't think it's really comprehensible first, and it doesn't really look at the realized impact on the real economy. And the other thing is all the discussion around the climate alignment methodology, which I think is a first step. It's interesting, but if you really, really look at it, when you look at the climate alignment methodology, what you do is you take a company, you have a carbon footprint, or how much carbon the company is emitting, and that your fund invests in. Then you can have a few sector scenarios, and then country or climate scenarios, and you get an alignment number. So how much my fund is aligned. But you can have two companies, more or less, producing, like let's say you have two companies, one produce a gummy bear, the other one is producing solar energy. They both have the same CO2 footprint, and they both have the same, let's say, decarbonization pathway, or how much they want to decarbonize, and you will get to the same degree although one clearly doesn't contribute to, the transition, and one does. So that's why at one moment, I think if we really want to combat greenwashing, especially for the green, we need to really go toward looking at beyond the footprint and also what we call the handprint of a company. What does the company in the portfolio contribute? To which extent does it contribute really to the transition? And this is something which is missing, and to get there without a kind of industry classification, personally, I really don't say it's done, or it could be really done. So I used to say, that, taxonomies, and it's like winter, you like or you don't like it, it's coming, basically.
Thank you for that statement. Any reactions to that, maybe from you, Yvonne?
No, I think I can only echo what the colleagues here have said. Our big hope also for the COP26 was that there would have been clearer signals on standards. And of course, the lack of data is an issue, but the standards, if we have so many shades of green, of course, it opens up sort of the Pandora's box on what is in the product. Do we all understand also the same thing? That is maybe also a question. We talk a lot about climate and biodiversity, of course, on this panel as well, but we still have also the S and the G. And we shouldn't forget those. And in some products, they are a very important component. And there are also clients who wish to have more of a social impact. And in some products, of course, they are E, S, and G, but might be then criticized because people were actually looking for a climate product. And that maybe is then also a challenge to the industry or in general to also, of course, be more clear in the description in the product, the material on the product and what's in there. But I think standards is absolutely key for this greenwashing and to get to a better stage.
Probably to add here, there are already standards in place. Here, meaning concrete, when you have the MSCIs and Sustainalytics, to which regulation they follow? They follow the European regulation. They disclose data on taxonomy. They disclose this information also then in the upcoming years on a global scale, meaning we will have this information. Even in Switzerland, we don't have a common language. What means sustainable itself? Meaning this is from the back door, and we have to realize that we can use this information in the upcoming years, but we have to ensure also the quality of this information. Also, think about when we have the last crisis in 2007, 2009. There was also a topic of ratings where it's on the agenda. This can be also a point that should not be underestimated in the upcoming years. That's the reason why some institutions now starting to say, we will buy raw data and doing then our analysis or we go further that, meaning be a front runner to such extent. And we know in the market there are these institutions, they build now big database or already have done that in the past. They have 8 data providers where they're only buying raw data and convert it. But this is a huge exercise. And here also keep in mind the regulatory framework in the upcoming years will become tighter and tighter when we see that in the European Union with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Because this had been, in our opinion, the first regulation that has to be on the carpet, because here you have GRI, you have TCFD, you have taxonomy, you have SFDR, also the PI indicators, everything flows there, and also the scope will be extended to 250 employees. This is enormous. And here we will also see then data will be better, and there has been also a lot of discussion regarding the data quality in the European Union, because they also say they're using web crawlers, spiders, and so on. The data is not accurate. And here it's also the plan to regulate the data providers itself also. But this will kill the smaller ones. Is that in the interest? And then the other question here probably to open ESG data or environmental data. This is a public good, no? Should be that not provided for free or by the government, by a platform? What do you think?
I really liked your point about that some banks are actually now, they want to go to the core and ask for the raw data because they don't trust the taxonomies or the ratings. And yeah, of course, it should be a free good. I think two things. The first one is very often I think we look at what is the client's demand, what does the client want. But maybe we need to turn the question around and ask, well, what can we do to educate the client, to explain to the client, well, maybe climate is not the only topic. You have to look at it much more holistically. You have to look at the social, you have to look at the biodiversity, etc. So that's one aspect. In terms of the data, anyway, I'll come back to that. I forgot my train of thought. I'll come back to that in a moment.
Okay, maybe I can. So just to react on the data, no, I mean, having a free, I mean, if all the environmental data will be for free, I mean, it will be great. I mean, it will make our life also much easier, NGO. I mean, that's completely for it. Like if every bank will disclose their loan, like the bank from the Alliance are doing, honestly, that's for transparency on the credit side, that would be really, really good. But one thing also on data, which I think it's really, and we discussed it in the session before, which is really, really right now a challenge is for biodiversity. It's what we call asset level data. So if you really, really want to know what a company is doing, you need to know where it is doing. So where are the activities of a company exactly? And this is completely lacking, and companies are usually not reporting on it. So from a regulatory point of view, I think what would be really good is really also asking companies to report on where are their activity located in the world. Because if you go beyond climate and you want to look at nature, you need to have this information. And currently the reporting on that it's really lacking. And yeah, from a pure regulatory point of view.
Thank you. I would like to slightly come back to the subject on transparency and client interaction again. Of course, we can discuss data afterwards as well. But Yvonne, I would be interested in what did you do in the last years to increase transparency on environmental issues? Maybe also in the client interaction, what worked? In terms of this idea of educating the client, what was well received, but maybe did you scratch after a bad experience? That would be really interesting.
Thank you. I mean, I think in general, we've come a long way in the last couple of years, especially due to Corona. I mean, because when I was preparing, there was one of the questions here also saying, is it a sort of a tick-the-box exercise, and is it difficult to engage the clients on the conversation? At least we feel or we see that across our client segments, be it the corporates, the institutionals, or the retail clients, people want to talk about it. They are concerned. They want to understand what it means maybe for their investments, but they want to know what it means for their business model. It's not something you need to force on people. And of course, what we also do very much, we invest in education for our client advisors. We want to equip them, to help them have those discussions, to come up with solutions, to come up with proposals. You mentioned also that in the survey rating that you did, digital was not sort of felt to be very on the forefront. And we strongly believe in the digital, and that is a real lever to actually get forward, and we just launched also as an example a sustainability analytics tool. It's more geared towards larger portfolios at the moment, but it is really a dashboard online where you can run your portfolio through. You can see the CO2 footprint, you can see the ratings associated with the assets that you have there. You can play around saying what would happen if I changed here and there, to give clients the possibility to have that transparency and to make adjustments to their portfolios for a trajectory that they feel are important. And that is just an example of how you can give that transparency, improve it, and give clients the tools also to make the changes that they want. So I mean, that's an example.
And do you see if that clients use it? Do you already have some experience?
So it was launched now in October, so it's a bit early days, but we had an event where we demoed it for clients. for pensionskassen, so for pension funds, and there was quite a rush to the booth to see that. It's quite impressive when you see all the charts and the dashboard. Something I think they hadn't really realized was possible. So we have big hopes that that will be a really value-added service that we can offer.
Will be that also roll out in the online banking?
Let's see. But for now, it is for larger portfolios, not for mandate solutions, for example.
Okay, if there is no pressing issue around here, I would turn to the audience to ask a few questions on this first block on transparency and client interaction. We have around 10 minutes to discuss some of your questions. So just raise your hand and speak up if you would like to engage in a discussion. Yes, please.
How many, for example, on the alliance or on the benchmark, do have a systematic way of assessing non-financial preferences for clients?
Honestly, I don't have this result in mind. Caroline, if you're somewhere in the room, do you know it by heart? How many of the 15 banks do systematically ask for the sustainability preferences? So we can come back to you.
Yeah.
That's okay. I don't have it in my mind, but it's what we see is that it's not all of them, and the ones that do, there it's not very systematic. That's kind of the takeaway.
Yeah, and if I may, I don't remember the number exact, but it was clearly not a majority. And also there is not only in the retail bank, also in the private banking. The University of Zurich is doing another benchmarking, a bit similar to ours actually, and there they ask them, one of the criteria is to which extent does a private bank, include sustainability preferences in the know your client, KYC process, and the last survey was 2019. They're redoing it now, and it was really surprising. It was really last time. I think it was 2 banks really, and it was like Global End, so like the sustainable bank, and I was very surprised. I guess it might change with the regulation coming, but for me, it's a key element to show if you really mainstream sustainability within the bank. This criteria, actually.
Anybody else? Yeah, yes, please. Marianne.
It's more like an idea when you were talking before that if we have now MSCI sustainable indexes, but also all the others still, so wouldn't it be then ideal if governments would start influencing the normal standard indexes towards the regulation and saying, look, these type of indexes, they are not anymore wanted, in the sense that we need to redefine the way we measure success, and how do you get into a benchmark if there are only benchmarks that really force you to include environmental aspects, social aspects, government aspects, and the others slowly disappear? Doesn't the regulation need to also include that and say, well, we only want sustainable indexes, and if you want to get into any index, then you need to adapt your business towards it? Or would that be totally unthinkable?
Anybody? This difficult question.
Well, I never thought about it. I think it could be interesting, but I will challenge the idea of any index based on MSCI data. Sorry, I mean, I'm not sure that it really grab, again, the impact that a company can have. I'm a bit critical of the ESG current data, like for the reason I explained before. So, yeah, I think we need new kind of data, and on this transparency question, we need really a few indicator for client that they can really understand, and that, a few indicator for E, for S, and for G, all the same for all the fund, and that client can understand, and that are linked to the realized impact. And the ESG data of MSCI currently, I think there is a lot of lack. So, and I think that a lot will have to improve if the regulator will go that way. But
And nevertheless, although we criticize the data providers, we have to start at such extent also the industry, and meaning the MSCIs that are helpful is a starting point, but they will be developed also in the upcoming years. Moreover to that, there is in the European Union the EU benchmark regulation. Probably you are also aware of that. There are 2 new benchmarks in particularly. These can also be taken into account, Paris Aligned and Climate Transition Benchmark. This is another topic, and also keep here in mind the whole problem will be extended regardingly. Now we're talking of fund level when we take a look on the SFDR, but the scope will be extended by next week also to derivatives. And here there is also the big discussion, what is a sustainable derivative? We have here a lot of discussions with investment banks because it's also a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for a lot of companies, and there are also kind of standards in place that can be similarly used to understand that. And also here it's also starting from the point, have a definition in place, have a KPIs in place, and also when it comes to derivative, it's not only the product, it's also about the issuer itself of the derivative. But this is another topic.
Maybe I can add a few sentences to that regard. There was actually, during the COP, an announcement of another net zero alliance that probably nobody really noticed. And it was really about stock exchanges and index providers. And they also made some pledge to have, I think it was Paris-aligned index as default. I don't know where that will go, but I saw this announcement with interest, and I think it's really needed because we see that banks really use that argument to not change their investment. So we have the Swiss National Bank that tracks indices with their asset management and says, oh, we can't do anything about it, we just invest in indexes. And also, maybe let me turn to Yvonne. I read in the report by the Net Zero Asset Manager Alliance about UBS's pathway and progress that currently I think you're aligning 20% of the assets under management to net zero, and the reason for that it's not more was given that all the others track certain indexes and we can't do anything about it. And I wondered, do you? I mean, I think it's okay to say that for now, but you probably can't say that forever. So, do you know? Is there any plan to change those investments that are now tracking unsustainable indexes?
So, of course, we have actively managed. That's another story. They, of course, have the control or the possibilities to adapt your portfolios. I mean, what I can only say, it is just a journey. And of course, as standards become available, as things are possible, of course, we look at opportunities to improve, which we have done year on year on year. We have also signed up to the Net Zero Banking Alliance now in April. So that then, of course, more touches the lending side again. There we're also working on our plans to be then published in spring. Will it be perfect? Will it be everything at once? Probably not. But it is a journey, and also I'm sure the colleagues in asset management are also thinking about how could we make that share bigger. But maybe coming back to the question here in the room on the standards, and couldn't we force to have something from the government? Maybe to add is we talk a lot about the EU and Switzerland, but we also have Asia and we have the US, and where we feel especially that it's a challenge is that all regulators are moving at different speed. Some are more ambitious than others, EU especially, and then Switzerland, I think we are sort of there in the middle trying to find our way. But we have clients with global portfolios. We have clients who want one view. They don't want to say, is my asset now green in that jurisdiction and is it maybe not so green there? And that is where we feel is a big challenge. And of course, that's when people probably like to lean on big names or ratings that are available, because those are at least globally somehow accepted. But maybe you have a view to that, or what you've seen in your research, if that echoes this verzetteln that we see in the regulation.
Yeah, we take not deep into the regulatory topic of this study, was not the idea, but you're totally right. First of all, you pointed very clearly out that different jurisdictions move differently. We see kind of a common understanding and standards regarding TCFD. This is commonly accepted. Also Hong Kong, Singapore like that. Switzerland moving also in the same direction. Of course, we have then France, Germany, the BaFin, and so on. There are kind of these differences, and also when it comes to the data topic, it is a big challenge for the whole industry itself. But we will see also kind of a movement in the upcoming years, and the quality will be better and better. But here, one of the big discussion is more, and this is also what we will see in the market when we're advising from northern banks until southern banks in Europe and also globally. When I have MSCI, I can coverage also 80%. What I do with the other 20%, meaning what is here the approach of UBS with that? Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you use kind of two providers or one provider, or what is your intention, or how do you tackle it here in particularly? Also when it comes to small and mid-sized companies, emerging markets, for example.
I mean, I think one of the challenges we do have here in Switzerland, but everywhere, is of course the lack of data for, as you say, small and medium-sized enterprises. They are not listed, they are not reporting. Many of them will not fall under TCFD either. What do you do with them? One thing, we have been working together with the University of Zurich as well as Credit Suisse and Zurich Insurance Company on a rating to develop one. It's in pilot stage now. It was also announced in November, to give that tool to the small and medium-sized enterprises here, the KMUs. I don't know if it's available in such a thing in the EU. We haven't heard about it, but we felt that it would be important to give exactly the small enterprises a possibility to see where they are on the journey, to maybe think where they can improve. Let's see how it evolves. Maybe that could also be then a source for that data, so that one could also then eventually have more transparency in that space. But it's a pilot. We are now gathering the clients across ourselves to see, and then hopefully then in 2022 be able to launch something that is then broadly also accepted in the market.
Thanks. This is also already going into the direction of the next topic of mortgage and SME lending. And so let's take a short, quick other survey to wake everybody up before we transition to the next subject. So again, just scan the code and answer the question. You can choose multiple, just to let you know. You don't have to select just one. So not surprisingly, most votes go to integrating environmental. Oh no, it is surprising. I just misread. So most actually go towards the risk subject, so that the most effective tool is to integrate environmental and social risks into the business activities. And we have another cluster about increasing the transparency about the sustainability impact of the products, making clients aware, and that's what you mentioned before with educating the clients, and by increasing corporate lending and with sustainability goals. We have very few votes going towards the ecological mortgages, and so I think this is a good start to go into our next subject, which is transforming mortgage and SME lending. And for that, just a few numbers for you. Currently, 45% of the Swiss building stock, the Swiss building stock consumes 45% of the total end energy demand in Switzerland. This creates about 1/3 of the domestic CO2 emissions. And there are currently 1,071 billion Swiss francs outstanding in mortgages. So this is roughly 1.5 times the Swiss gross domestic product. And the market for ecological mortgages is mostly under 1%. In the rating, numbers were reported between 0 and 6% by the banks. But although not all banks answered this question. With that, I'm happy to welcome Rico Travella on stage. Rico Travella is the head of marketing and communications at the Alternative Bank Schweiz, and he will share with us the ABS experiences with regards to climate target and in particular when it comes to their mortgage portfolio. The floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. As a very small bank, we are some kind of a special case, but maybe a pioneer or a visionary case. I want to talk about 4 subjects quickly, because I only have 7 minutes. I will a bit rush through it. So first thing I want to talk about is the mindset on transformation. Sustainability as the core of a business model is one important thing for us. For example, Martin mentioned it before. There is intrinsic motivation of a value-based bank to put sustainable impact in the real economy on the core of the business. This means the whole business model and all the criteria we choose are strict and very consequent, and we provide full transparency on everything we do. We engage community, and we have commitment. We signed the climate change commitment of the Global Alliance, and there we said, okay, we're going to provide all over a CO2 footprint till the end of 2021. And we have a clear goal. We want to match the 1.5 degree global warming till 2030. So first thing is the mindset. The second thing is, do we know the gap for transformation? As I just said, CO2 footprint overall is for us an important tool to find out where we stand. What do we measure? We measure our operations. We know the footprint. We know the development of the footprint, and we tackle there to continue to have continuous reduction. And we fully compensate that with my climate. So the climate impact is net zero. Second thing to know the gap. What do the investment activities of our clients? So we have a CO2 footprint, and we compare that to a, let's say, a tailored index, which represents about the same thing what we do. And what we see, you see the green bar is our portfolio compared to a tailored index. Can we measure 1.5 degree match? For client portfolios, we can't, but we can for our own fund we have. Third thing, and with that we are probably, as far as we know, the first bank in Switzerland who covers a all-over CO2 footprint, is we looked at what is going on with our mortgages, with our loans, with our credits, And there we see that mortgages, real estate loans are responsible for 94% of the CO2 footprint, which is more than the share of the volume we have. What we also see is, you see that on the right side of the slide, that buildings with a high standard, ecological standard, have an underproportional impact on the footprint. We also looked at the 1.5 degree compatibility, and there you see we have some work to do. But for us, it's also important to really publish those things. It's important to know where to go. It's important to see where we have to act, and also to know what could have an impact. So, third thing I want to tackle is what are the challenges for transformation, especially in the real estate sector. So, money matters, but not only. And also bank matters, but not only. We have a lot of challenges we are facing. It's not only finance issues, it's regulations, it's approvals of communities, it's availability of technical stuff, it's priority, it's also an awareness of the asset owners. It's a rather complex theme. If you want to renovate ecologically, you have to handle that, and so on. But what are the actions to take to thrive this transformation? If we look at the urgency of climate change, we can't afford just to wait and see and wait for regulations. And the gap offers big opportunities. If you look at the chart here, you see the dotted line is the Swiss building inventory. If we want to go down till 2050, the curve or the line is ambitious, but if we want to go down to 2030, it's a rather steep line. And we also did that for our portfolio. You see the greener lines represent the buildings that are on an ecological standard. They have to go to be moved down also. And the bigger part is also a challenge for us to bring that till 2030 to 1.5 degree. We heard a lot before about regulations. If we look at actions, we think we have to raise much more awareness with emphasis on the urgency for transformation. We are going to tackle that even stronger next year. We offer a holistic rating. We do that already since decades, so that people can find out where they stand in point of sustainability. We offer an easy online tool to see what renovations we could do. New products with incentives is one thing that could help. But most important thing, we have to work together. We have to have cooperations, all of us together, to bring sustainable transformation on track. We need as many different actors as possible. And not only banks, it's also communities, it's NGOs, it's the people.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much for this presentation. So now let's open the discussion. Would anybody like to react to what you just heard? Was anything surprising, interesting? Would you like to challenge something?
No, thanks a lot for the interesting presentation. And for me, the number you say, like the 90%, over 90% of your footprint comes from mortgages, I find it I'm not surprised in a way, and I'm still surprised that and that's why I'm also surprised that in the Merimeter before it was quite low, the measure on mortgages and real estate, while you think about it as a retail bank, a Swiss retail bank, and it showed it also as ABS, and I guess the number might not be exactly the same, but it's the same range for Swiss retail banks. The higher impact you have, or one of the highest impact, will be through your mortgages portfolio and not through your asset management, actually, or fund you sell to clients. So I find it very, very interesting. And then the second on what needs to be done and the ecosystem you mentioned, I think it's really interesting because yes, alone I think the real estate and the hypothec thematic is quite complicated, and banks need to interact, I think, in the ecosystem and think how to work with the politician, with the NGO, with the heating engineer and heating installators and a building company, because it's not that simple. And maybe one thing I think we think a retail bank could do is to be also a bit more vocal politically, because if you think about it, one way that is quite effective to lower the carbon emission of the Swiss real estate sector is regulation. I don't want to put the that the bank gives the hot potato to the regulators, but it is true that it is an effective measure. We saw in Zurich the recent votation. So if now the canton of Zurich is saying, okay, you cannot replace anymore your heating system with a fossil fuel heating system, I think it's very effective. So here, maybe the bank could also put political pressure, be more vocal, and use their power as well to lobby the government.
Exactly. Thank you. We're trying to speak up, so it's important. Yes.
Yeah, maybe from my side, I didn't want to go first because then I would just say, I agree with you. No, I mean we see the same things as you had on your slides. I mean we echo very much I think maybe why people didn't put it in the voting as a big lever is because it's not known actually how much real estate contributes to CO2 emissions. Maybe for the normal person. I mean, if we're not all climate specialists, right? I mean, maybe that's the reason. But I strongly believe, like you do, it's not a bank alone or the regulator alone. It needs everyone to make the change happen. Of course, it's a shame that the CO2 Act didn't pass. That would have given some framework, some sort of guidance for everyone to move towards. As you said, we now saw in Zurich the passing of the Energy Act. That will probably, of course, move the needle in Zurich. Challenge is, of course, then all cantons move at different speeds. I think it's also a challenge for the person who wants to renovate or to build to find their way in the jungle of incentives, of rules, which depend from canton to canton. And there is, therefore, as you suggest, an ecosystem with partners to give that advice to clients, probably of value as well. But there are specialists there. I mean, as a bank, we are not engineers. We're not specialists if a solar panel is better than the Wärmepumpe. But I think they're coming together in partnership. There you can have an impact and move the needle.
Maybe one reaction to that. As you mentioned it before, you talked a lot about regulations, and regulation is kind of slow. So, but we don't have the time. Mm-hmm. So if you look at extreme events, what happens now? We're facing that all over the world. If we wait and the climate warming, the global warming goes up, those extreme events will occur much more frequent. So our approach was, as when we founded the bank 30 years ago, was a deliberate approach. So people choose to be more sustainable than they were before. So if we want to have success, we have to, everyone of us has to make a first move. So we can't just say, oh, I'm not responsible. So my house is maybe, yes, it can wait. No. I think this is an important thing we also want to tackle. And we do that also with in communications, but also if we talk to our clients, everybody can bring his share, her share to make a better future.
Question, do you think it makes sense that when the government comes with subsidies, because when I have now to change from one day, I have now the heat pump that has been mentioned, and then I have oil and gas, and now I have to change today. And then my heat pump costs me 120k, and my oil and gas costs me 60k. Do you think here should be government intervention, or can that help with this kind of incentivizing that we will change our behavior? Because it's money in our pockets at the end.
You seem to have a big house.
Not.
No, of course, incentives are all, we are human beings, so incentives help to speed things up. But it's not the only thing. We have incentives. We have incentives that are not being taken. In the Gebäudeprogramm of the Federation, it's not being taken. People are not doing the move, even though they would get money from the government. So the first thing is in ourselves. We have to know where we want to go, what we want to leave to the future generations, and as we know, heating and individual traffic is, I think, 70–80% of our CO2 output. So it's not so difficult to grasp.
Maybe to add, and that's why I mentioned not passing the hot potato to the regulator, because I think the regulation is very important, but like you say, I want to emphasize, it's slow. And I think if banks and the private sector generally always wait, for the regulator to act, then we will, be nowhere. And I think a first step as a bank is not only to increase the share of the green or the eco-hypothèque. I mean, that's a first step, but it's also to try to align the overall mortgages portfolio toward a net zero target. And for this, I imagine a first step would be to make a brave movement and say, look, we have a policy that we're not financing anymore the replacement of fossil fuel heating. I mean, that's possible. A bank can decide this and knows where he wants to go. So I think it's both. We need a regulatory development because they're effective, but I think bank can also start to make a bold move and bold policy and decision. So.
I want to bring Martin into it.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks a lot, Rico. What I really appreciate is that you're shifting the conversation away from how do we figure out which assets are green and which aren't, which is the wrong way of thinking, towards transformation. How do we actually have impact and change? Because I think that's what sustainable finance is about. And I think that's what I'm very often missing in these kind of conversations. And what I really struck me is that even a bank as advanced as Alternative Bank Switzerland still has such a huge problem of in its portfolio. And I think if ABS has that kind of problem, I can only imagine what the problem is, for example, for a bank like UBS, which is much bigger and certainly not as strict as ABS in terms of the activities it does. And I don't want to finger point at UBS, but I just, as a mainstream bank, I think that's one aspect. And I think the other thing that you showed is that ABS has developed a vision of where the world needs to go, and it has deducted what it can contribute, and it's leveraging that, on the one hand side, the client relationship by sensitizing the clients and targeting the client and helping them to understand what the challenge is and how they can contribute. And secondly, by providing financial innovation and creating the kind of products that can help that the client eventually sees, well, actually, with that kind of financial instruments, maybe my Wärmepumpe is, after all, even though it's 120,000 instead of 60,000 cheaper in the long run than if I would simply replace it with a gas boiler again. So I think it's this kind of creativity that we need to see, and we need to really shift away from this conversation about taxonomy and this and that and regulation. The regulator can maybe come in, and we have to talk with the regulator when when the regulation prohibits financial innovation. Then we need to bring the regulator into the picture. But at the end of the day, banks, they have a responsibility that they drive the direction where the finance goes. And I think that's really the key issue around sustainable finance.
Maybe just a couple of words on a bit the sort of different kind of animals that we are talking about, just to get, I think with investments, it can be shorter term. You can decide today if you want to get out of this product and into another. You can make quite a quick choice and shift your portfolio if you choose so. Financing the transition, if we talk about corporate lending, is probably also something that you can have the discussion, you can speak with the corporate client, you can help them talk about their business model and future. But mortgages is a very, very long-term business. I mean, you have 10-year mortgages, 15 maybe. They're not up for renewal. They roll over like they do in Switzerland, which was new to me. I come from Finland and we pay back our mortgages, right? And here they continue forever. Sort of mindset shift for me. But I agree with you. Of course, we have the opportunity, the possibility to advise our clients, to help them to, when it's up for renewal, to highlight the fact that there are options. We also now launched a renovation mortgage with preferential conditions to help clients, to bring them, to show that there are options to do so. I also strongly believe, actually probably also in your book, but in most of the banks' book, that there are more green properties than what's here. I think what a big challenge in Switzerland, I hate to come back again to the standards and stuff, but we do not have a common standard. We have the Minergie, we have the GEAC certificates, but we see that very few clients actually have them because they're quite costly. And you don't really need them unless you sell the property to sort of maybe add to the value and show that it's a Minergie. We don't have the ABCD like on the fridge when you buy it, which many countries have, like the Netherlands, I believe the UK. It's, I understand, quite cheap to get, and even a must for like renting an apartment. You need to show that, and that also, I think, maybe the Swiss building park wouldn't look so bad, or necessarily, we would have more know where it is better if we had a common standard where all banks could say this is where we are. And that is something we think would help to have common standards or a rating. But in the meantime, of course, yes, work with the client, show them options that also may be not that costly. But on the other hand, you also have, I also live in a Stockwerkeigentum. We are 8 parties. We have 2 who wants to put solar panels on the roof since years. They come every year to the meeting and say solar panels. And we have one guy who doesn't want the solar panels. We don't have solar panels.
I'm fully with you. It's a complex theme. But as I said, if we look at the challenges, but on the other hand, everyone who has children would like to have those children running around without a mask in the open space. So maybe we could think about what we should do that the air doesn't get more polluted and the earth doesn't get warmer. So there are easy tools to find out what you could renovate, what you should renovate. There are ratings. We have one, and I think it's also important that many actors work together. Also, other banks work together. As a small bank, it was always for us the idea to be rather a model than the market runner. The idea is to have a common sense of what we do. Then we can reach the target. To really work on that very important issue on housing. Because this really contributes to the CO2 problem we have.
Maybe I have a follow-up question for you, Yvonne. UBS has a net zero target, and I just wondered, have you also developed already these reduction plans? And can you already say what it looks like, more or less, like on an annual basis? How much do you need to reduce to be on that net zero pathway? And then, if you have your net zero target and your pathway, then it's really a question of, okay, now we really need to achieve it. So do you already have a plan, or it's still into making, or what can you already say?
No, as I mentioned, we signed a net zero commitment in April, and like every bank that signs, that's the starting point. And then you start working within your respective firm on what is then the baseline, where do you start? So you analyze your portfolio, and then you start drawing the possible pathways. And of course also it's important saying what opportunities do you have, what levers do you have, what investments might you need to do in order to then do to come down, and that is still a work in progress. So that is what we have worked a lot also over the summer on different portfolios, and not only real estate but also on other portfolios in scope for the first round. And as announced also, that we communicated in April, these pathways or targets would then be communicated, disclosed in spring as part of our sustainability reporting and annual reporting package. Then we would also talk about net zero and how to get there.
And maybe a question to both Antonio and you, Martin. You both work internationally with banks in different countries, and I just wondered, like, do you have any best practices that you can share with us from other banks that did some measure and it really made a difference? What have you seen with other players?
Frankly, I think it's still very early stage, what we've seen is just what Yvonne just said. I think there's a lot of commitments that have been going on, and I think that's great. I think the challenge is banks cannot move by themselves. Banks are just simply a reflection of the real economy, especially when it's about finance. And so actually the real economy has to change, and the banks have to think how they can help that change in the real economy. Unless, of course, they simply exit from all the climate harmful activities that they are currently doing. That's one option they have, of course, which for most of the banks is not really an option, and I think it would also not really help our economy. So I think it's very individual, and to go back maybe to the Swiss real estate sector, we have 1.7 million buildings in Switzerland, and 75% of these buildings are older than 30 years. And certainly some of them might already have been renovated, but many still are coming up for renovations. So I think there is a chance there that you will find certain models that you then you just have to, as a bank, start piloting models that you can scale up, and I think the market is big enough to do that. So that's the challenge. But I don't think there is one solution or one golden bullet that can work anywhere. I don't think if I listen to the banks in our movement that have committed to net zero by 2035, 2040, they all are struggling with this very issue, just as ABS is also struggling with the issue.
Probably to elaborate a little bit, what we see currently is that the European institution moving fast also to the fact that there is a EBA loan origination guidelines, meaning at the end of the day ESG had to be integrated in the whole loan origination process. What is that? This means starting to include ESG in the KYC process. Then afterwards in the loan approval process, then also in the pricing models. Here there are also international standards as ICMA, green loan principles, social loan principles, also sustainability-linked loan aspects that they are currently taking into account, and also the EU taxonomy in particularly, and dedicated screening criteria. Depends on the countries to have here also an understanding where they stand also when it comes to climate risk, to evaluate it in a dedicated manner. Of course, here it's also the level playing field aspect where we stand here also in Switzerland, but in Switzerland also probably we have not only to do regulation, or perhaps self-regulation can be also a way to go. And what not a lot of people know in Switzerland is also that now the bigger banks committed to TCFD, this Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. There is now in the disclosure of banks, they have to disclose that, BSCS and so on. They already do that. This is nothing new. But not a lot of people know that due to the fact that this is linked to the TCFD, and TCFD is now in consultation and will be amended regardingly to the topic of financing, this will come anyhow also be part then of Switzerland. Meaning there is here also to evaluate kind of the business opportunities, and when we also talk to retail banks, here the bigger ones can be easier prepared, but for the smaller ones, here we have also to raise the question of proportionality itself. Meaning over-regulation can also destroy a market. It's also kind of, we have to think about balance and checks. And on top of that, we heard now in the discussion, everybody talked about CO2. What is really net zero? Net zero is about the big six. There are other gases as methane and so on that has to be properly taken into account. Meaning there is a long way to do. We know that, but probably some guidance can help, but we have also to take care not to destroy the Swiss market or generate the real estate market.
Thank you. So with that, I would again give you as the audience the possibility to ask one or two questions before we come to a close of this event. Yeah, go for it.
I would like to ask a question more to have it a bit more granular. Could you maybe share how the perfect products would look like for banks in mortgages, and also the argument what is in them for the bank? So what is in for the client and what is in for the banks? Why should they offer them? What's the benefits towards compared to today's products in lending and in the mortgage business? What exactly would I, as a client, benefit from, and what type of products would you suggest?
If you're talking products, then you should get a reward if you are more ecological. So that's what you get at our bank. If you have we do a rating, and if you reach a certain level, you get a better mortgage. So there's something in for you, and for us it's always as I said before, what is the business model? Is the business model sustainable impact, or is the business model maximum profits? So maybe the bank or we would be happy if we have maximum impact, not maximum profit. So we want to do as much profit, which helps us to survive, a sustainable, that we can do sustainable innovations. So it's rather targeted on the sustainable impact in the real economy. So that's in for the bank. But this is a kind of mindset also. And for the client, it's clear. Maybe he gets a cheaper mortgage. Maybe he or she gets also a better image. So how can we make it visible? How can we make it achievable? That you have a green financing, or that you're putting money into your house. Because if you're driving an electric car, everybody sees it. So with the house, probably you don't see it.
Maybe to add, on mortgages, but I think an interesting product as well is sustainability-linked loan. So where a loan is linked to the sustainability performance of a company. And in Switzerland, there is nearly none of those products, we saw. Not I know everything, and it's interesting to see that in other countries, like in France, for instance, the French bank is really starting to offer that kind of product. And in Switzerland, not. And I don't have an answer, honestly, why is that, if it's a loan. But I do think it's very, it's going in the same direction, except it is for corporate lending, as what was mentioned.
Yeah, we have numerous criteria and exclusion criteria and promotion criteria and so on.
Maybe just on the sustainability-linked loan, just to comment on that. We do have them. We do offer them to our corporate clients. Of course, green bonds, but also sustainability-linked lending. They tend though to be more for the larger corporates, and there are clients who are actively looking for those sort of solutions, that then we work with them. Maybe just on mortgages or the sort of, you say a bit either profit or impact. maybe I see it a bit broader. I think also as a bank, by providing mortgages, you also have, especially when you have such a big scale, like of course the larger banks have. I mean, I would count also the cantonal banks, of course, in here. Is you also have a bit of a social mission or responsibility. I mean, you make it possible for people to buy their home as well. It is not only profit or impact; it's also a social component there. Currently, I believe most of the products on the market are, as you say, linked to a certain benefit, probably using a bit of a discount or better preferential conditions. I think we can maybe discuss also saying, is that going to move the needle a couple of basis points for large sums of money, or do we need more strategic solutions also as part, everyone together, maybe also with politics and regulation and incentives to have a package that's a bit more impactful and attractive than the bank alone, as you say, coming in with a special offer. And I think that is more what we would welcome, sort of discussion, and I think they're also ongoing in the associations, is saying how can we really move the needle with more strategic solutions in the future.
Thank you very much. I think that was a good closing remark, that we need a strategic solution that is impactful. I really think that should be our takeaway, to have that in all the areas. And with that, I would like you to thank you for your participation. I have something for you from WWF, and I will hand it over afterwards. It's a book about the rivers that are still more or less intact, like the few rivers in Switzerland that are still more or less intact. And it provides you guides how to hike along those rivers, how to enjoy nature, and how to really experience what we are working for, and always bring that back to your mind. Do that with your friends, your family. I hope that gives you energy for your work that you're doing every day. If you like to know more about WWF and our work in sustainable finance, also how we cooperate with the private sector, please contact us, approach us now, obviously, but you can also contact us after the event via our email addresses. And with that, I also thank all of you for joining this event, for sticking it out here until the last minute. And I hope we see you again in another setting. Thank you very much.